Hello, my name is Stacey Mankoff, and I'd like to welcome you to this edition of the Bellringer, our 21st volume. So we're very excited to have Ryan Singer, managing partner at Vex Capital. And today he's going to discuss the Digital Agora, a future-focused discussion on digital global expansion. Ryan is as I mentioned, the managing partner at Vex Capital, which is a VC fund. He is also an entrepreneur extraordinaire, which he started the first American Bitcoin exchange, Trade Hill, and also founded Crypto Corp, Blockchain Clearing, Blockchain Health, and many, many more companies. Ryan, welcome.
Hi, great to be here.
Hi. Great to be here. And I know you're in Puerto Rico, which has now become one of the hubs of the crypto world.
It's extraordinary, actually. There's a Bitcoin meetup every Monday called Crypto Mondays that has between 100 and 150 people every Monday, which I believe is the most attended in-person crypto meetup in the world right now, at least the most attended weekly one.
That's amazing. And that's something we'll probably be bringing our After the Bell events to Puerto Rico sometime at the end of this year. Now, to get started, I'm very excited and love to work with you. Anyway, the first question I have to ask is, you've coined the term Digital Agora. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, I think really what this is putting a lot of Balaji's ideas in the context of kind of the history of libertarianism. There was a guy in the 70s, Samuel L. Konkin III, who wrote a book about agorism, this political philosophy he came up with, which was the idea of just ignoring the state, of living a life that's, based on pseudonyms, that's based on cash, and developing local relationships, and just ignoring the existence of the state and state-run institutions as much as possible. And it was popular among small-scale kind of hippie left libertarians at the time, but it never really went anywhere because it doesn't scale. But if you read a lot of what Balaji's been writing about, and he has a new book coming out soon about the rise of pseudonymity on the internet and the role that Bitcoin and Ethereum play in that, where Bitcoin and Ethereum allow people using pseudonyms to transact with each other. And that allows them to build up kind of commercial reputation, to do more complicated things like forming things that look like firms, called DAOs that look a lot like corporations and act a lot like corporations, and to build all of that infrastructure on top of a pseudonymous layer. It looks a lot like agorism, but it looks a lot like agorism on a global and corporate scale, which is very, very interesting. If you look at how normal business works, or I say traditional business, we form corporations that are incorporated by states. The people who form those have legal identities that are granted to them by states. That use their passport or their driver's license as proof of those identities to banks. And then the banks are really the dominant regulator of businesses, because it's the banks that impose compliance with the taxes, and it's that impose compliance with accounting law. And so what we have in traditional business is corporations are creatures of the state, governed by the banks, and the banks are overseen by the state. And that is where basically all large-scale human endeavor happens. But in this new world, this digital agora, we have entities like DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations, and fundraising events like ICOs, and banking networks like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And what we end up.
So you were speaking about the ICOs and the DAOs, and the Agora, and the digital Agora, and the history of the Agora. What has been their impact currently?
We're seeing for the first time the growth of multi-million-dollar, in some cases multi-billion-dollar businesses that have stakeholders, and they have founders, and they have executives, and they have operations, and they have revenue. They don't have bank accounts, and they don't have legal identities front and center, right? Where most of the interaction between the stakeholders and the organization happens via tokens. Stakeholders express their will via voting tokens instead of voting shares. Nobody at the organization knows who owns most of those tokens. And the token holders don't know from a legal basis who are the individuals involved in the organization. It's all cryptocurrency, it's not banking, but we end up with these things that look and feel very much like corporations and that act on a global scale. And so to me, this is very interesting because what we're seeing for the first time is this distributed global agora that's almost intentionally ignorant of the governments in which govern their users and their founders, and instead govern themselves online via nothing other than contracts and reputation and transactions.
Okay. So when you're talking about all of this, what are some of the positive implications for the individual and also for industries?
Well, I think for individuals, as both an entrepreneur and an investor, it's possible for the first time to found organizations that have global scale on day one and to invest in global opportunities on day one. It used to be that when you found an organization, you had to focus locally before you could go global. You had to kind of hire locally. You had to open a bank account at a local branch.
Right.
You do a fundraise from investors in your direct close social network. You had to deal with the incorporation laws and the business laws for your local jurisdiction. You know, entrepreneurship and investing still was not very global, even in the internet world, because banking and policy is by definition very local. And corporations didn't really become global until they scaled and had more global operations and had more global teams. But in the ICO and DAO world, these organizations are kind of on Twitter first and are on Ethereum first. And so they start very global. They start with pseudonyms that don't disclose where they live locally. And so that's very interesting to me. This kind of global fundraising, global investing, global operations as the default mode, instead of as something that you scale into. And I think that's very good for entrepreneurs and investors. I think the other major benefit is there are a lot of places where most people who could start businesses or invest in businesses are underdocumented, right? Large parts of Latin America, large parts of Africa, you really just can't do business, or large parts of Asia, you really just can't do business with the American and European banking systems. It's just not possible. You don't have, your government doesn't issue to most people the kind of documentation that would be necessary. And so for those people, they have access to global capital and global talent and to global investment opportunities for the first time. And so I think what we'll end up seeing is, except for some early successes, we'll see DAOs and ICOs be popular first and successful first in the developing world before the developed world catches up. In the same way that we saw developing countries get high grade, high speed wireless internet before they even had copper phone lines.
That's interesting, because now, I mean, DAOs have become very commonplace. I mean, I Googled it and I can create my own DAO for $49. So, you know, it's become a thing now.
That's cheaper. That's cheaper than a Delaware corporation. Delaware corporation costs $500 these days.
I know. Plus every year you have to pay in.
That's right.
So which industries do you think are going to be the most benefited by all of this?
Well, remember Mark Andreessen said software is eating the world. And what he was really referencing there was two trends. One, that a larger and larger percentage of GDP goes into services instead of goods or food or real estate as an economy develops, including as the global economy develops. But also anything that software can automate, it will. Right? Anything that can be done by computers instead of humans can be done at a much lower marginal cost and at much better pricing and with much faster service. And so between those two, that the whole economy is going into services, and that services are can be delivered globally in an automated fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing is kind of everything becomes software, right? Like
Right.
buying a fridge becomes software. Getting from one point to another in New York City becomes software.
Well, since I'm involved with both of those things, that sounds very interesting.
Right? And so DAOs and ICOs,
Mhm.
because they're global first, because they have cheap costs of capital, and because they have they're pseudonymous and they have a very different regulatory situation than corporations do.
Mhm.
I think are better places to build and deploy global scale software as a service. And so as everything moves to being managed by software services, I think everything's going to move into DAOs eventually. And that's actually what I'm working on with Vex Capital. Is
Mhm.
I'm working on helping venture funded technology companies that already provide software services
Mhm.
tokenize their APIs in a way that allows their investors to exit to their customers, which effectively allows them to become a DAO.
Right. Oh, that's so interesting. Um, and it all sounds great, but is there a downside or a dark side to this?
Well, there absolutely is for the United States. If you look at the fiat banking system,
Mhm.
the way that the United States fundraises is using what I call bookkeeping taxes. They mostly charge taxes on income, capital gains,
Mhm.
transfers, gifts.
Mhm.
Right? They tax accounting,
Right.
and the reason they can tax accounting is because accounting can't be done at scale without bank accounts, and the government has basically deputized the banks as cops.
Mhm.
Right? If you've ever heard of the phrase "know your customer" and anti-money laundering, what
Yes.
that is that's the federal regulation that requires the banks to collect information about their customers and pass it along to the federal government. And
Mhm.
that's the basis of the United States, all of our federal taxes basically, and a
Mhm.
large percentage of our state taxes too.
Mhm.
Um, I don't believe the United States is a good backup plan for what to do if a substantial percentage of business and a substantial percentage of income moves to a decentralized, pseudonymous world,
Right.
where the
Okay.
bank, where the banks aren't helping enforce tax rules, and bookkeeping taxes become something that a lot of people just don't cooperate with. I think Europe will be fine in that transition. And the reason I think that is because Europe's federal layer, the European Union, doesn't collect any direct taxes.
Mhm.
And Europe's member countries are actually more like the size and shape of US states than they are like the size of the United States, right?
Right. Right.
And so most of the member countries have at most 2 or 3 large cities, and
Mhm.
some of them only one.
Mhm.
And so for countries like that, where there are just 2 or 3 cities that have the vast majority of the wealth in the country, they can switch over to property taxes and real estate taxes very easily. And it doesn't matter who owns a building when you tax it, because if whoever owns the building, if they don't pay the taxes, you literally just seize the building and auction it. And now there's a new owner who will pay the taxes.
Right.
And so
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that Europe will be able to transition to a world where you can only tax the things that are nailed down
Mhm.
very easily, with very little change in how they provide government services and very little change in how they take care of their people.
Mhm.
I think the US, because we do so much through the federal government, and because the states rely so much on federal coordination, and because we pay over half of our taxes directly to the federal government in the form of bookkeeping taxes, I think the US will have to change a lot in some very awkward and difficult and painful ways if it wants to adapt to a world where most commerce happens in an online, global, pseudonymous, non-national fashion.
Well, I think you've given us a lot to think about right now. These bell ringers give you a taste of some of the discussions that we will be having. And obviously, adaptability is going to be key if the US wants to be a player in this digital agora.
Absolutely.
So I will, yes.
Long term, I do feel optimism for the US
Mhm.
because it's the most entrepreneurial country in the world, and it's one of the only countries where the national myth is future focused. The U.S. is one of the only countries in the world that believes deeply in the future. So I think we will be able to get through the awkward pivots, and we will be able to build a future we're excited to live in. But it's gonna take some transition.
I agree, but as you and I are both descendants of immigrants, we know we get things done.
That's right.
Anyway, to quote Hamilton, thank you very much, Ryan. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to another bell ringer. And thank you all for listening.
Bye.